I'm Miranda, and I'm 28 years old. There's no point in you meeting my parents, Daniel said casually over breakfast, not even looking up from his phone. They won't be coming to the wedding anyway. Just like that. 6 months engaged, 2 months from walking down the aisle, and my future mother-in-law was apparently too unimportant to meet. I sat there staring at my coffee, wondering if this was normal behavior for millionaire fiancés. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely blindsided by someone you trusted. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. So let me back up and tell you how I got here. Daniel Hoffman swept into my life 18 months ago like something out of a romance novel. Successful businessman, gorgeous smile, and enough charm to make my grandmother blush. He owned 3 successful restaurants downtown and lived in a penthouse that probably cost more than most people's houses. I was working as a marketing coordinator for a small agency, making decent money, but nothing spectacular. Our first date was at his flagship restaurant, where he knew every staff member by name and insisted on showing me the kitchen. He was passionate about his business, talked about expansion plans, and seemed genuinely interested in my work. When he proposed 6 months later with a ring that made my friends gasp audibly, I thought I'd won the lottery. Turns out the lottery ticket was fake, but we'll get to that. But there were small things that bothered me. He never talked about his family except to mention they lived up north somewhere. No childhood stories, no holiday traditions, nothing. When I brought up wedding planning and suggested involving our families, he always changed the subject. I figured maybe they weren't close, or perhaps there was some family drama he didn't want to burden me with. That morning's conversation was different, though. The finality of it, the dismissive tone. They just wouldn't fit in with our crowd, he added when I pressed him. Trust me, it's better this way. Better for who, exactly? I wanted to ask, but something in his expression warned me off. Daniel could be charming and loving, but he also had this edge that appeared when he didn't want to discuss something. His jaw would tighten, his voice would drop, and the conversation would simply be over. I spent the rest of the day at work distracted, replaying our conversation. My colleague Sarah noticed my mood immediately. Wedding jitters? She asked sympathetically. Daniel doesn't want me to meet his parents, I confessed during lunch. Says they won't even come to the wedding. Sarah frowned. That's unusual. Have you met any of his family? I shook my head, realizing for the first time how strange that was. That evening, Daniel was working late again. He'd been putting in longer hours recently, supposedly finalizing a new restaurant deal. I found myself alone in his penthouse, surrounded by expensive furniture and artwork, feeling oddly disconnected from it all. This place was beautiful, but it didn't feel like home. It felt like a showroom, or, as I was starting to suspect, a crime scene. I started thinking about my own family. Sure, they could be overwhelming sometimes, but the idea of getting married without them there was unthinkable. My parents had already bought their outfits. My sister had planned a bridal shower, and my grandmother was learning to use FaceTime just so she wouldn't miss any wedding details. The contrast was stark. Daniel came home around 11, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. Long day, he said, kissing my forehead. The investors are being difficult about the new location. I almost mentioned his parents again, but decided against it. Instead, I smiled and asked about his day, playing the supportive fiancé role I'd perfected over the past 6 months. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Daniel's steady breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Who doesn't want their fiancé to meet their parents? Who excludes their own family from their wedding? And more importantly, what was Daniel hiding? The next morning, I did something I'd never done before in our relationship. I lied. I'm having lunch with my sister today, I told Daniel as he prepared to leave for work. Might do some shopping afterward? He barely looked up from his phone. Sounds good. I'll be late again tonight, another investor meeting. Perfect. That gave me the entire day to do what any reasonable woman would do when her fiancé refuses to let her meet his family. I was going to find them myself. Look, I'm not usually the snooping type, but when someone tells you their parents aren't worth meeting and won't be at your wedding, that raises some questions. Call me old-fashioned, but I believe in knowing who I'm marrying. Revolutionary concept, I know. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, still logged into his email. I know, invasion of privacy and all that. But desperate times, desperate measures. I scrolled through his recent emails, looking for anything family-related. Most were business correspondents, restaurant suppliers, real estate agents, nothing personal. The man had the emotional digital footprint of a corporation. Then I remembered his wallet. Daniel kept everything in that thing, business cards, receipts, random pieces of paper. I found it on his dresser, thick leather and probably worth more than my monthly rent. Inside, behind his credit cards, was a faded business card for Hoffman Family Farm, fresh produce since 1952, with an address in Millfield, about 3 hours north. Hoffman family farm. So much for having no family worth mentioning. I took a photo of the card and did a quick internet search. The farm had a basic website with photos of vegetables, a small farm stand, and a brief history about being family-owned for 3 generations. There was even a photo of an older couple, Robert and Helen Hoffman, standing proudly in front of a red barn. These people looked nothing like the wealthy, disconnected family Daniel had implied. They looked like hard-working farmers who'd probably be thrilled to meet their son's fiancé. So why was Daniel so determined to keep us apart? This was getting more interesting by the minute. I called the number on the website. A woman answered with a warm, slightly tired voice. Hoffman Farm. Hello, I said, my heart racing. I'm looking for Robert and Helen Hoffman. This is regarding their son Daniel. There was a long pause. Who is this? The woman asked, her tone suddenly cautious. My name is Miranda Collins. I'm Daniel's fiancée. Another pause. Longer this time. Oh, she said finally, and I could hear something in her voice. Surprise? Sadness? Fear? I see. Well, I'm Helen Hoffman. Daniel's, yes, his mother. The way she hesitated before claiming him as her son sent chills down my spine. Mrs. Hoffman, I was hoping we could meet. Daniel and I are getting married in 2 months. And I'd love to get to know his family. He told you about us? Helen asked, sounding genuinely shocked. Not exactly, I admitted. He said you wouldn't be coming to the wedding, but I thought maybe if we met. Oh, honey, Helen interrupted, her voice heavy with something I couldn't identify. You need to come here. We need to talk. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. Is everything okay? Not over the phone, she said firmly. Can you come tomorrow? Around 2 o'clock? And Miranda? Don't tell Daniel you're coming. Not yet. The warning in her voice was unmistakable. Because apparently, warning your future daughter-in-law to hide from your son is totally normal family behavior. I agreed, already planning the drive to Millfield. As I hung up, my hands were shaking slightly. What had I just gotten myself into? And why did Helen Hoffman sound like she was afraid of her own son? That evening, Daniel came home with flowers and Chinese takeout from my favorite restaurant. Thought we could have a quiet night in, he said. His charm dialed up to 11. He was being extra attentive, asking about my day, complimenting my hair. It felt performative, like he was trying to distract me from something. How was your investor meeting? I asked as we ate. Productive, he said vaguely. Should have the final paperwork signed next week. I nodded, twirling lo mein around my chopsticks and wondering if anything he told me was completely true. Probably about as truthful as a politician during election season. The drive to Millfield took exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes. I'd told Daniel I was visiting my college roommate in Albany, a lie that came surprisingly easily. He'd barely looked up from his laptop when I kissed him goodbye, muttering something about working on contracts all day. Contracts that were probably as legitimate as his family relationships, apparently. Hoffman Family Farm was smaller than I'd expected from the website photos. The red barn needed paint, the farm stand looked weathered, and the whole property had an air of quiet desperation. I parked next to a pickup truck that had seen better days and took a deep breath. Whatever I was about to learn, it was going to change everything. Helen Hoffman answered the door before I could knock. She was shorter than me, probably in her early 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and hands that showed years of hard work. Her eyes were the same blue as Daniel, but where his were cold and calculating, hers held warmth and deep sadness. Miranda? She asked, and when I nodded, she pulled me into an unexpected hug. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Before I could ask what she was apologizing for, she ushered me inside to a kitchen that smelled like fresh bread and coffee. Much more welcoming than Daniel's sterile penthouse, if I'm being honest. Robert Hoffman sat at a worn wooden table, a large man with calloused hands wrapped around a coffee mug. He stood when I entered, his expression guarded but polite. So you're the girl our son is marrying, he said, not unkindly but with a weight to his words that made me nervous. Sir, I replied, unsure how to address the situation. Daniel has told me so little about you both. I was hoping we could get acquainted before the wedding. Helen and Robert exchanged a look loaded with meaning, the kind of look that says, how do we tell her she's engaged to a monster? Sit down. Dear, Helen said gently, we need to tell you some things about Daniel that you might not know. My heart started racing as I took a seat at their table. Things like what? Robert cleared his throat. Miranda, how much do you know about Daniel's business success? He owns 3 restaurants downtown. They're very successful, always busy. He's looking to expand. Helen's face crumpled slightly. Has he told you how he got the money to start those restaurants? I shook my head, suddenly dreading where this conversation was headed. He got the money from us. Robert said bluntly. From this farm. From our retirement savings? From money that was supposed to keep us from losing everything? The room felt like it was spinning. Well, this explained the family estrangement. Nothing says loving son like financial ruin. I don't understand. Helen reached across the table and took my hand. 18 months ago, Daniel came to us with what he called an investment opportunity. Said he'd found the perfect location for a restaurant, needed startup capital, and promised he'd pay us back double within a year. We trusted him. He's our son. We gave him everything. Robert continued, his voice rough with emotion. Sold off half our farmland, emptied our savings account, even took out a loan against the house. $250,000, every penny we had. I felt sick. And he paid you back? Helen laughed bitterly. Oh, honey, we haven't seen a dime. We can't make our mortgage payments anymore. The bank is starting foreclosure proceedings. But his restaurants are successful, I protested weakly. They're always packed. With our money, yes, Robert said. He built his empire on our backs, and now we're losing the farm that's been in our family for 3 generations. I stared at them in shock, trying to reconcile this with the man who bought me expensive dinners and a 5-carat engagement ring. The ring that was apparently purchased with stolen retirement funds. Romantic. Have you ever had that moment when you realize you've been living in a completely different reality than you thought? Share your experiences in the comments below. Tell me everything, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Helen and Robert looked at each other again, and I could see years of pain passing between them. From the beginning, Helen poured me more coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Daniel was always ambitious, even as a child. Smart as a whip, charming when he wanted to be. But there was something calculating about him. He could manipulate situations to get what he wanted. She paused, staring into her coffee. We thought it would serve him well in business. We never imagined he'd use it against us. Robert picked up the story. He left for college on a scholarship, studied business and finance. We were so proud. After graduation, he moved to the city, got a job at some investment firm. For a few years, we barely heard from him except for obligatory Christmas cards. The hurt in his voice was palpable. Then suddenly, about 2 years ago, he started calling regularly, Helen continued, visiting every few months, bringing expensive gifts, taking us out to fancy dinners when he came to town. We thought our son had finally grown up, realized family mattered. She laughed bitterly. We were so naive. He'd ask about the farm, about our finances, Robert said. Seemed genuinely concerned about our retirement plans. Said he'd been researching investments, new ways to make our money grow faster than traditional savings accounts. We should have been suspicious, but he was our son. Parents want to believe their children have their best interests at heart. I thought about my own parents, how they'd trust me implicitly if I came to them with a business proposal. The betrayal these people had experienced was unthinkable. When did he ask for the money? Spring of last year, Helen said. He presented it like a business partnership. Said he'd found the perfect restaurant location, had experienced managers lined up, and just needed capital for startup costs. Promised we'd be silent partners, entitled to 50% of the profits. He had documents, Robert added, legal-looking contracts, financial projections, even photos of the potential restaurant space. Everything seemed legitimate. And you gave him everything? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Helen nodded. We believed him when he said it was a sure thing. He even suggested we could move closer to the city once the restaurant was profitable, maybe buy a smaller place and retire comfortably. The first few months he sent us updates, Robert continued. Photos of construction progress, receipts for equipment purchases, copies of permits and licenses. We thought everything was going according to plan. When did you realize something was wrong? When the first payment was due, Helen said. According to our agreement, we should have received our first profit share 6 months after opening. When I called Daniel to ask about it, he got angry. Said the restaurant industry was more complex than we understood, that profit margins were tighter than expected. He made us feel stupid for asking, Robert said, anger creeping into his voice. Like we were being greedy, pestering him for money when he was working so hard to build something successful. I could picture Daniel doing exactly that. He had a way of making you feel foolish for questioning him, a talent for turning reasonable concerns into personal failings. By this past winter, we were behind on our mortgage, Helen continued. The money we'd given Daniel was supposed to last us through retirement, and we'd also taken out that loan against the house. We called him, explained the situation, asked if he could advance us even a small payment. He accused us of being financially irresponsible, Robert said. Said we should have budgeted better, that it wasn't his problem if we'd mismanaged our money. The cruelty of it took my breath away. And I thought Daniel was cold when he forgot to put his dishes in the dishwasher. What about the contracts? The profit-sharing agreement? Helen's face darkened. We took them to a lawyer in town. Turns out they weren't worth the paper they were printed on. The legal language was so convoluted that, essentially, Daniel owed us nothing unless the restaurant exceeded certain profit margins that were impossible to verify. He'd planned it from the beginning, Robert said. Designed the whole thing to take our money legally while giving himself complete protection. I felt nauseous thinking about Daniel sitting in his penthouse, surrounded by expensive art bought with his parents' life savings, while they faced losing their family farm. Helen stood up and walked to a kitchen drawer, returning with a thick manila folder. "We've documented everything," she said, placing it on the table between us. "Every email, every phone call, every broken promise." She opened the folder to reveal bank statements, printed emails, and copies of the contracts Daniel had given them. I stared at the paperwork, my engagement ring feeling heavy and obscene on my finger. "Mrs. Hoffman, why didn't you go to the police?" Robert laughed harshly. "With what evidence?" Daniel covered his tracks perfectly. "Technically, he didn't steal from us. We gave him the money willingly, signed contracts that were legal even if they were deceptive. The lawyer we consulted said we might have a case for fraud," Helen added. "But it would take years and cost money we don't have. Meanwhile, the foreclosure proceedings move forward." She pulled out a document and slid it toward me. "We have 6 weeks to come up with $40,000, or we lose the house." $40,000, probably less than Daniel spent on his wine collection. I picked up one of the emails, dated 8 months ago. In it, Daniel explained to his mother that the restaurant was still finding its footing, and that expecting profits so soon showed their lack of understanding about business realities. The condescending tone made my skin crawl. "There's something else," Helen said quietly. "Something we haven't told you yet." She exchanged another look with Robert, who nodded grimly. "When we started asking for payments, even just small amounts to help with the mortgage, Daniel became threatening." My blood went cold. "What kind of threats?" "Nothing explicit," Robert said carefully. "But he made it clear that continuing to harass him about money would have consequences. Said he had resources now, good lawyers, and that we should be careful not to damage his reputation or interfere with his business." I thought about Daniel's controlled anger, the way his voice dropped when he was displeased, the subtle intimidation I'd dismissed as intensity. "You're afraid of him," I said. It wasn't a question. "We're afraid of losing what little we have left," Helen corrected. "Daniel has the power to destroy us completely, and we think he would if we became too much of a problem." The folder contained photos too. Pictures of the farm from happier times, family gatherings, Daniel as a child riding on Robert's shoulders. The contrast between those innocent images and the current reality was heartbreaking. "Why are you risking telling me this?" I asked. "Why chance making him angry?" "Because you're about to marry him," Helen said urgently. "Because maybe if you understand who he really is, you can protect yourself. And maybe," she paused, hope flickering in her eyes, "maybe if he truly loves you, he might remember that he used to love us too." But I could see in her face that she didn't really believe that anymore. Neither did I. The man who could systematically destroy his parents' financial security and then threaten them into silence wasn't capable of the kind of love that inspired generosity or forgiveness, or basic human decency, for that matter. "Mrs. Hoffman," I said carefully, "what exactly are you afraid Daniel might do?" The question hung in the air like a live wire. Helen's hand flew to her throat, where I noticed for the first time a small scar. "Miranda, honey, you need to be very careful how you handle this information," she said. "We mean," Robert added, his voice heavy with fear, "that if Daniel finds out we told you about this, we're not sure what he might do. To us or to you." The full implications of what they were saying hit me like a physical blow. I was engaged to a man who had financially destroyed his own parents and threatened them into silence when they asked for help. A man who had built his success on their ruin and felt no remorse about it. A man who was apparently capable of intimidation and threats when people inconvenienced him. "I need to go," I said, standing abruptly. I need time to process this." Helen caught my hand as I reached for my purse. "Miranda, please, be careful. Don't let him know you came here, at least not yet. Promise me you'll think this through before you confront him." I promised, though I wasn't sure how I was going to face Daniel knowing what I now knew. As I drove away from the farm, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Hope you're having fun with your friend. Can't wait to see you tonight. Love you." The casual affection in his message felt like mockery now. Love. What did Daniel Hoffman know about love? About as much as a shark knows about vegetarianism, apparently. The drive back to the city passed in a blur of panic and disbelief. By the time I reached Daniel's penthouse, I had gone through every stage of grief except acceptance. Denial had lasted about 30 minutes. Anger had carried me through the next hour. Bargaining occupied another hour as I tried to find explanations that would make this all make sense. Depression hit during the final stretch. But acceptance? That wasn't coming anytime soon. I sat in Daniel's parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at my engagement ring and trying to figure out how to proceed. The smart thing would be to pack my belongings and leave immediately. Cut my losses. Dodge a bullet. Thank Helen and Robert for their warning. But I couldn't stop thinking about them losing their family farm. Couldn't stop picturing Helen's trembling hands and Robert's defeated posture. Daniel had stolen their entire future, and he was living comfortably off their sacrifice while they faced homelessness. The injustice of it made my chest tight with rage. Plus, if I was being honest, I was terrified. Helen's warnings about Daniel's capacity for threats kept echoing in my mind. What would he do to a fiancé who discovered his secrets? Daniel was in the kitchen when I walked in, cooking what smelled like his famous pasta carbonara. He looked up with his $1,000,000 smile, the one that had charmed me into saying yes 6 months ago. "There's my beautiful fiancé. How is Albany?" "Fine," I managed, setting my purse down carefully. "Sarah says hello." "I missed you today," he said. "Had to eat lunch alone like some tragic bachelor." His easy charm felt sinister now, like watching a snake perform tricks. Those same hands stirring the pasta had signed documents stealing his parents' life savings. "How was your day?" I asked, proud of how normal I sounded. "Productive. The new location is almost finalized. Should be able to start construction within a month." Construction funded by his parents' foreclosure. Their decades of hard work converted into Daniel's expanding empire. How entrepreneurial. We ate dinner while he talked about his business plans, future restaurant concepts, a possible cookbook deal. From Fraud to Fine Dining, a memoir would be an appropriate title. All of it built on a foundation of betrayal and theft. I nodded and smiled and made appropriate responses while screaming internally. "You're quiet tonight," Daniel observed, refilling my wine glass. "Everything okay?" This was my moment. I could ask him directly about his parents, about the farm, about the money, lay everything on the table and demand answers. But Helen's warnings echoed in my mind. "Be careful. Think this through before you confront him." "Just tired," I said instead. "Long drive." Daniel studied my face with those cold blue eyes. For a moment, I worried he could see through my facade, that he somehow knew I'd spent the afternoon with his parents. But then he smiled and squeezed my hand. "Well, I have something that might cheer you up." He pulled out his phone and showed me photos of an enormous floral arrangement. "I ordered flowers for the church. Wanted to surprise you." The arrangements were gorgeous and probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Money that could have saved his parents' house spent on wedding decorations instead. "They're beautiful," I said, my voice barely steady. Later, as Daniel worked on his laptop in the living room, I retreated to the bathroom and called my sister Kate. "I need to talk to someone," I whispered. "Can you come over tomorrow?" "And Kate, don't mention it to anyone. This has to stay between us." "Miranda, you're scaring me." "What's wrong?" "I can't explain over the phone. Just, can you come?" She promised to drive over first thing in the morning. After I hung up, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked pale, shocked, like someone who'd just witnessed a car accident. In a way, I had. I'd witnessed the complete destruction of my understanding of the man I was supposed to marry. That night, lying next to Daniel while he slept peacefully, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything I'd learned. This man beside me had methodically destroyed his own parents' lives for personal gain. He'd manipulated them with false promises and legal documents designed to protect him while leaving them with nothing. And now they were losing their home while he planned our elaborate wedding with money that should have been their retirement security. The moral bankruptcy of it was staggering, but what terrified me more were Helen's warnings about his capacity for threats and intimidation. If Daniel could treat his own parents with such calculated cruelty, what would he do to a fiancé who discovered his secrets? As I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought kept repeating in my mind. I was engaged to a man who was not just dishonest, but potentially dangerous. And he had no idea that I knew. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out how to extract myself from this engagement without ending up like his parents, scared and financially ruined. Because one thing was becoming crystal clear. There wasn't going to be a wedding in 6 weeks. The question was whether I'd survive long enough to call it off. Kate arrived at 8 in the morning with coffee and the determined expression she'd worn since childhood when someone needed rescuing. My sister was 2 years older and had never met a problem she couldn't solve through organization and sheer force of will. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it was her. "Okay, Spill," she said, settling onto Daniel's expensive couch. "You sounded terrified last night." I told her everything. Helen and Robert's story, the stolen money, the threats, Daniel's complete lack of remorse. Kate listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. "Miranda," she said when I finished, "you have to leave. Today. Right now." "I know, But it's not that simple. All my stuff is here, my lease expired last month, and Daniel handles most of our shared expenses. Plus, I'm scared of what he might do if I just disappear. Kate was already pulling out her phone. You're staying with me until we figure this out. We'll get your essentials today while he's at work. Worry about the rest later. But what about his parents? They'll lose everything. You can't save them by marrying their psychopath son, Kate said bluntly. In fact, staying puts everyone in more danger. If Daniel suspects you know about his crimes, you could all be at risk. She was right, but the guilt was overwhelming. We spent the morning planning my escape like we were plotting a heist. Kate would drive over during Daniel's usual lunch break, help me pack my essential belongings, and I'd leave a note explaining I needed space to think. Nothing confrontational. Nothing that would trigger his anger. What about the wedding? We'll cancel everything once you're safe, Kate said. Vendors will understand, guests will survive the disappointment, and you'll live to see 30. That's what matters. Around noon, my phone buzzed with Daniel's usual lunch text. Investor meeting running long. Might be late tonight. Love you. Perfect timing. Kate noticed my hesitation. What is it? Probably nothing. Just paranoia. But something about the message felt off. Daniel usually called when plans changed and his meetings rarely ran long. Take only what you absolutely need, Kate advised as we gathered my clothes and important documents. If you clean out everything, he'll know you're not coming back. We want him to think you just need a few days to clear your head. I packed like I was going to a weekend spa retreat. Casual clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and important papers hidden in a gym bag. As we prepared to leave, I caught sight of my engagement ring. The 5-carat diamond that had once symbolized love and security now felt like evidence of a crime. I slipped it off and left it on Daniel's dresser with a simple note. Need some time to think. We'll call you soon. Miranda. Kate drove me to her apartment in Brooklyn, where we sat at her kitchen table making lists of everything that needed to be canceled or changed. The florist, the venue, the caterer, the photographer. Each vendor represented thousands of dollars in deposits, most paid from Daniel's accounts. Blood money, as it turned out. He's going to lose a lot of money, I realized. Kate snorted. Good. Consider it partial restitution for his parents. That evening, Daniel called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened with shaking hands as his voice filled Kate's quiet apartment. Miranda, I found your note. I understand you might need space, but leaving your ring behind seems dramatic. Call me back so we can talk about whatever's bothering you. I love you. The controlled tone didn't match the underlying tension I could hear. This wasn't the reaction of a man whose fiancé just needed time to think. This was someone calculating his next move. He knows, I told Kate. Something's wrong. How could he know? I don't know, but that message doesn't sound right. He's too calm. Then my phone buzzed with a text that made my blood freeze. I know you weren't in Albany yesterday, Miranda. We need to talk. My hands started shaking. Kate, he knows I lied about where I went. How could he possibly know that? Before I could answer, another text arrived. My phone has location tracking enabled for security. Imagine my surprise when I saw you spent yesterday in Millfield. Not Albany. Of course. Daniel was the type of person who'd track his fiancée's location without telling her. The red flags just kept coming. He tracked my phone. I whispered. He knows I went to see his parents. Kate grabbed her car keys. We're going to the police. Now. But my phone was already ringing. Daniel again. This time I answered, putting it on speaker so Kate could hear. Hi, I said, trying to sound normal. Miranda, sweetheart, where are you? I came home early to surprise you, but you're not here. His voice was velvet smooth, but I could hear the steel underneath. I told you. I needed some space. I'm staying with Kate for a few days. I see. And yesterday, when you said you were in Albany, my mouth went dry. What about it? Let's not play games, darling. I know you were in Millfield. I know you visited my parents. What I'm curious about is why you felt the need to lie about it. The pretense was crumbling. Daniel, I can explain. I'm sure you can. Why don't you come home so we can discuss your little investigation properly? I'm very interested in what my parents told you. The invitation sounded more like a command. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below and make sure you're subscribed for the dramatic conclusion. I think I'll stay here tonight, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Miranda! His voice dropped to that dangerous register I'd learned to recognize. Come home. Now. We need to talk about this like adults. Kate was shaking her head frantically, mouthing, hang up. I'll call you tomorrow, I said quickly and ended the call. Immediately, my phone started buzzing with texts. This isn't like you. Whatever sob story they told you, there are two sides to every story. Don't make me come looking for you. Then, Kate's apartment building has interesting security footage. Very easy to access if you know the right people. I felt the blood drain from my face. He knows where you live. Kate grabbed her phone and called 911. While she spoke to the dispatcher, I tried to process how Daniel had gotten her address so quickly. I'd never given it to him, and Kate and I weren't connected on social media where he could have found it. The police are sending a patrol car, Kate said after hanging up. They'll do a welfare check. Make sure no one's watching the building. My phone rang again. Unknown number this time. Don't answer it, Kate warned, but I was already swiping to accept. Hello? Silence. Then Daniel's voice, artificially cheerful. Playing hard to get, I see. That's fine, Miranda. I enjoy a challenge. Daniel, you're scaring me. Am I? That's unfortunate. I'm simply trying to have a conversation with my fiancée about her recent dishonesty. Reasonable people can discuss these things without drama. I'm not coming home tonight. Of course you are. Because if you don't, I'll be forced to assume you're having some kind of breakdown. Mental health crises require intervention, don't they? I'd hate to have to involve doctors or lawyers or your employer about your erratic behavior. The threat was clear. He could make my life miserable if I didn't comply. Classic manipulation tactics, straight out of the abuser's playbook. You can't force me to come home. Daniel laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. Miranda, darling, I have resources you can't imagine. Private investigators, security firms, people who specialize in finding information. Did you really think I'd built a successful business without learning how to protect my interests? That explained how he'd gotten Kate's address so quickly. He had people who could track down information within hours. What do you want from me? Just a conversation, face to face, like civilized people. And if I refuse, then I'll be forced to take protective measures. For your own safety, of course. Erratic behavior in someone with access to wedding vendors and joint financial accounts could be problematic. He was threatening to destroy my reputation, maybe even have me committed. I haven't done anything wrong. Haven't you? Lying about your whereabouts, abandoning your engagement ring, refusing to come home when your concerned fiancé asks? That sounds unstable to me. I'm sure others would agree. Kate was frantically writing notes, gesturing for me to keep him talking. What did you tell your parents about me? I asked. Nothing, because I haven't spoken to them. But I'm sure they gave you quite a performance. My parents are very creative when it comes to seeking attention. They said you stole their money. They said I what? His voice sharpened. Miranda, that's a very serious accusation. Are you sure you understood them correctly? They said you took their retirement savings for your restaurants and never paid them back. I invested their money in a business venture that has been wildly successful. The fact that they're disappointed with the timeline of returns doesn't make it theft. He was already starting to spin the narrative, twisting reality to fit his version of events. They're losing their house. They're experiencing financial difficulties due to poor planning. I'm not responsible for their inability to manage money responsibly. The casual cruelty in his voice was staggering. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in horror. Kate was already packing an overnight bag. We're not staying here tonight. Hotel, maybe my friend Lisa's place upstate, somewhere his people can't find us. But as we prepared to leave, I realized the terrible truth. Daniel had resources, connections, and apparently a network of people who would gather information for him. Running might buy us time, but it wouldn't solve the problem. And as long as Daniel was free to threaten and intimidate, his parents would never be safe either. None of us would be safe until someone stopped him permanently. Because one thing was becoming crystal clear. Daniel Hoffman wasn't going to let me walk away quietly. We ended up at a hotel near JFK Airport, a generic business traveler's place where Kate paid cash and registered under a fake name. I felt ridiculous, like we were living in some thriller movie, but my fear was very real. Daniel's threats had been subtle but clear. He could destroy my career, my reputation, my mental health, just like he'd destroyed his parents' financial security. We need evidence, I told Kate as we settled into our sterile room. Something that proves what he did to his parents. Something that shows his pattern of threats and intimidation. Kate was researching lawyers on her laptop. We need restraining orders and criminal charges. Let the professionals handle gathering evidence. But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Daniel was careful, probably always operated within legal boundaries even when his behavior was morally reprehensible. The contracts he'd used to steal from his parents were technically legal. His threats were implied rather than explicit. He was smart enough to avoid leaving a prosecutable trail. My phone had been silent for hours, which somehow felt more ominous than the constant calls and texts. Around midnight, Kate's phone rang. Unknown number. Don't answer it, I said, but she was already declining the call. It rang again immediately, then again. What if it's an emergency? Kate asked. The fourth call came from a different number. This time Kate answered, putting it on speaker. Hello? Heavy breathing, then a woman's voice, shaky and terrified. Is Miranda there? Please, I need to talk to Miranda. Helen? I grabbed the phone. Mrs. Hoffman, is that you? Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Robert's in the hospital. The stress. After some men came to the farm asking questions about Daniel, he had chest pains. The doctor thinks it might have been a heart attack. My guilt was overwhelming. My investigation had triggered this crisis, putting Robert in danger. Helen, what men? Who came to the farm? They said they were conducting a background check for a business deal. Asked all kinds of questions about Daniel's character, his relationship with us, whether we'd recommend him as a business partner. Kate and I exchanged glances. Daniel was having his parents investigated, probably to assess how much of a threat they posed. What did you tell them? The truth. That we trusted our son and he betrayed that trust. That he took our money and left us with nothing. Helen was crying now. Mrs. Hoffman, where are you calling from? A payphone at the hospital. I'm scared to use my own phone. Those men, they knew things about our finances, about the foreclosure. They knew details that Daniel must have told them. You need to get somewhere safe, I said. Do you have family you can stay with? We can't leave. The farm. If we abandon the property, we lose any chance of keeping it. And Robert can't be moved yet. After Helen hung up, Kate and I sat in the hotel room's oppressive quiet. He's escalating, Kate said. First tracking your phone, then threatening you, now having his parents investigated. He's trying to control every angle. She was right. Daniel's strategy was becoming clear. Gather intelligence on everyone involved, identify weaknesses, then apply pressure strategically. Classic business tactics applied to personal destruction. I have to go back, I said. Kate stared at me in disbelief. Are you insane? Not to stay, but I need to get close enough to gather evidence. Record his threats, document his behavior, get something concrete that police can use. Miranda, you just told me his own parents are in the hospital because of the stress he's causing. Going back is suicide. Staying away is suicide too. He'll just keep hurting people until I comply. At least if I confront him directly, I can try to control the situation. Kate spent the next hour trying to talk me out of it, but my mind was made up. The only way to stop Daniel was to expose him, and I couldn't do that from hiding. I needed to get him talking, admitting his crimes, making threats I could record and use against him. If you're determined to do this, Kate said finally, at least let me help. I'll stay close, call police if you don't check in regularly, and you wear a recording app, something to capture whatever he says. We spent the rest of the night planning what felt like a suicide mission. But what choice did I have? Daniel had made this a war, threatening everyone I cared about. The only way to end it was to fight back with evidence that could put him away where he belonged. I just had to survive long enough to gather it. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was the only way forward. Promise me, Kate said as I prepared to leave, that if things go wrong, you'll run. Don't try to be a hero. Just get out and let the police handle the rest. I promised, though we both knew that once I walked back into Daniel's world, my survival would depend entirely on his mercy. And mercy wasn't something Daniel Hoffman possessed, about as much mercy as a tax auditor, which is to say, none whatsoever. I returned to Daniel's penthouse at exactly 2 p.m, when I knew he'd be at his flagship restaurant for the lunch rush. Kate was parked across the street with strict instructions to call 911 if I didn't text her every 30 minutes. My phone was hidden in my jacket pocket where the microphone could pick up conversations. The apartment felt different somehow, like a crime scene waiting to happen. I moved quickly, gathering documents I'd noticed before but never really examined. Business papers, contracts, bank statements left carelessly on Daniel's desk. If I was right about his pattern of financial manipulation, there might be evidence of other victims. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. A folder marked Investment Opportunities contained detailed financial profiles of at least 6 other people. Elderly couples, small business owners, people with modest savings and trusting natures. Each profile included personal information, financial status, and what appeared to be psychological assessments of their vulnerability. Because apparently, Daniel was running a full-scale con operation. Who needs a dating app when you can just systematically target vulnerable people for financial ruin? My hands shook as I photographed every page. Daniel wasn't just a man who'd stolen from his parents. He was running a systematic fraud operation, targeting vulnerable people with sophisticated psychological manipulation. A noise from the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps, then the sound of a key in the lock. Daniel was home early. I shoved the documents back into the folder and tried to look casual as the door opened. Miranda. His voice was warm, relieved. I'm so glad you came home. We have so much to discuss. He moved toward me with his arms outstretched, the picture of a concerned fiancé. But his eyes were cold, calculating. This was a performance for an audience of 1. I missed you, he said, pulling me into an embrace that felt more like a trap. Daniel, we need to talk about… Shh. He pressed a finger to my lips. First, let me apologize for yesterday. I was worried about you, and I may have overreacted. It's just that when someone you love starts behaving erratically, you fear the worst. The gaslighting was immediate and smooth. Suddenly, my reasonable desire for space became erratic behavior that justified his threats. I wasn't behaving erratically. Darling, you lied about where you were, took off your engagement ring, and refused to come home when I asked. That's not like you at all. He guided me to the couch, his hand never leaving my arm. I'm concerned about your mental state. My mental state is fine. I just needed time to process some information. What information? His grip on my arm tightened slightly. What could be so disturbing that you'd feel the need to deceive me? This was my moment. I needed to get him talking, admitting to his crimes. I met your parents, Daniel. The change in his expression was immediate and terrifying. The concerned fiancé mask slipped, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. Did you? It wasn't a question. And what did my dear parents tell you? They told me about the money, about how you destroyed their lives for your restaurants. Daniel laughed, actually laughed. Is that what they called it? Destruction? I prefer to think of it as strategic resource allocation. They were sitting on capital they couldn't effectively utilize. I found a better use for it. The casual cruelty in his voice made my skin crawl. You stole their retirement savings. I accepted an investment from willing participants in a business venture that has been wildly successful. The fact that their expectations weren't managed properly is unfortunate, but hardly theft. He was playing word games, twisting reality to fit his narrative. They're losing their house because of you. They're losing their house because they made poor financial decisions. Working with me was just one of several mistakes they've made over the years. Daniel stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. Did they mention the other families? My blood went cold. What other families? Oh, Miranda. My parents were hardly my only source of startup capital. There were several other families who believed in my vision. Most were smarter about managing their expectations afterward. How many people have you stolen from? I've built successful business relationships with multiple investors over the years. Some understand the nature of high-risk ventures better than others. He was being careful with his words, but the recording app on my phone was capturing everything. I needed him to be more explicit. What happens to people who cause problems for you, like your parents did when they started asking for money? Daniel's expression darkened slightly. Problems require solutions, Miranda. Smart people learn to adapt to changing circumstances. Others need more guidance. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining how business works in the real world. You have choices to make about how you want our relationship to proceed. His voice was dropping to that dangerous whisper I'd learned to fear. What kind of choices? You can accept that successful people sometimes have to make difficult decisions, or you can join the ranks of people who forced me to take protective measures. He pulled out his phone and showed me something on the screen. It looked like surveillance footage of Kate's apartment building. Your sister has a very predictable routine. Jogs every morning at 7, stops for coffee at the same place, takes the same route home. It would be unfortunate if her predictable nature made her vulnerable to random city dangers. The explicit threat hung in the air like poison. Daniel had just admitted to fraud and threatened my sister. All recorded on my phone. But I realized with growing horror that evidence wouldn't matter if I didn't survive to present it. You're recording this conversation, Daniel said calmly, settling back onto the couch beside me. I can hear the slight electronic feedback from your jacket pocket. Very predictable. Miranda, I'm almost disappointed. My heart stopped. If he knew about the recording, he knew I was trying to gather evidence against him. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. I've been in business long enough to recognize when someone's wearing a wire. The question is whether you're working with police or just being paranoid on your own. He reached toward my jacket, and I jerked away instinctively. Don't touch me. Miranda, we're going to resolve this situation one way or another. You can cooperate and make it easy on everyone, or you can fight and make it difficult. But the outcome will be the same either way. His hand moved to his own pocket, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic. Panic flooded through me. Daniel, you don't want to do anything stupid. My sister knows where I am. If something happens to me, your sister thinks you're having a lover's quarrel with your fiancé. When you don't come home tonight, she'll assume you decided to work things out privately. People reconcile all the time. Miranda, it's very romantic. He was right. Kate would wait for my check-in texts, but if they stopped coming, she might assume I'd turned off my phone to focus on reconciling with Daniel. It could be hours before she called police, and by then, what do you want from me? Simple. Delete that recording. Forget whatever sob story my parents told you. Resume planning our wedding like nothing happened. Daniel's voice was reasonable, like he was discussing dinner plans rather than threatening my life. That's it? That's it. We go back to being a happy couple. You never contact my parents again. And we live our perfectly normal life. And if I refuse, then you become a problem that requires solving. The implication was clear, but I needed him to be more explicit for the recording. What does that mean exactly? It means that people who threaten my business interests sometimes find themselves facing unexpected difficulties. Health problems, accidents, professional setbacks. Life is unpredictable, Miranda. You've hurt people before. I've solved problems before. Sometimes problems resolve themselves naturally. Sometimes they require more direct intervention. The important thing is maintaining focus on long-term success. He was confessing to violence with the casual tone most people use to discuss the weather. My phone was still recording, capturing every word. If I could get this evidence to police, Daniel would spend the rest of his life in prison. But first, I had to survive the next few minutes. How many people have you hurt? Enough to understand that eliminating complications is sometimes necessary for business success. You'd be surprised how often a small problem becomes a major obstacle if you don't address it promptly. Daniel stood up and walked to his kitchen, returning with a knife from his expensive cutlery set. Now, give me your phone so we can delete that recording. I calculated my chances of reaching the door before he could stop me. The distance was too great, and Daniel was faster than his casual demeanor suggested. Miranda, his voice carried a warning. Don't make this more difficult than necessary. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, but instead of handing it to him, I did something that probably saved my life. I hit the emergency SOS feature, which immediately called 911 and sent my location to Kate. That was very stupid, Daniel said, but I could hear sirens in the distance. The police response time in our upscale neighborhood was apparently faster than he'd expected. They'll be here in minutes, I said, backing toward the door. It's over, Daniel. No, Miranda. It's just beginning. He moved toward me with the knife raised, his mask of civilized behavior completely gone. Do you really think I'm going to let you destroy everything I've built? I grabbed a heavy crystal vase from his coffee table and threw it at him, buying myself enough time to reach the door. The hallway had never seemed so long as I ran toward the elevator, hearing Daniel's footsteps behind me. You can't run forever, he called after me. I know where you live, where you work, where your family lives. This ends when I say it ends. But I didn't need to run forever, just long enough for the police to arrive. As I reached the lobby, uniformed officers were rushing through the front entrance. Help me, I screamed. He's trying to kill me. Behind me, Daniel appeared at the stairwell door, still holding the knife. The officers drew their weapons immediately. Drop the knife! Get on the ground! For a moment, I thought Daniel might try to fight. His expression was calculating, weighing his options. Then his shoulders slumped, and he let the knife clatter to the marble floor. This is all a misunderstanding, he said, switching back to his charming persona. My fiancé is having a mental health crisis. I was trying to help her. But the recording on my phone told a different story. A story of fraud, threats, and violence. A story that would finally bring justice for his parents and all his other victims. As the police handcuffed Daniel, he looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Miranda. You have no idea what you've just started. But I knew it was over. The man I'd almost married was a monster, and now everyone would know it. 3 months later, I sat in a coffee shop near the courthouse, waiting for the prosecutor to finish reviewing my testimony. Daniel's trial was set to begin next week, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. The recording from that afternoon had provided the foundation, but investigators had uncovered so much more. Turns out Daniel had been running his fraud scheme for years, targeting vulnerable people with sophisticated psychological manipulation. 8 families had lost their life savings to his fake investment opportunities. The FBI was calling it one of the most extensive financial fraud cases they'd seen in years. Daniel's business acumen was really just systematic theft with good lawyers. Helen and Robert Hoffman were slowly rebuilding their lives. The court had frozen Daniel's assets, and restitution payments would eventually help his victims recover some of their losses. It wouldn't be everything they'd lost, but it was enough for the Hoffmans to keep their farm and maintain some dignity in their retirement. I'd visited them twice since Daniel's arrest. The first time had been awkward, both of us struggling with guilt over how everything had unfolded. But over time, we'd found a way to support each other through the legal process. You saved us, Robert had told me during my last visit. We were so afraid of him, so convinced he was untouchable. Without your courage, he'd still be out there destroying lives. I didn't feel particularly courageous. Mostly, I felt lucky to be alive, and grateful that my terrible taste in men had at least resulted in a criminal being caught. Kate had taken a leave of absence from work to help me through the aftermath, testifying against Daniel, dealing with media attention, and processing the trauma of discovering I'd been engaged to a sociopath had required more support than I could manage alone. The hardest part had been accepting how completely Daniel had fooled me. I'd prided myself on being a good judge of character, but I'd lived with a predator for months without recognizing the danger. The engagement ring I'd left on his dresser had been evidence in his trial, a symbol of how thoroughly he'd manipulated my emotions. "Miranda?" The prosecutor approached my table, a thick folder in her hands. "Ready for our final prep session?" We spent 2 hours reviewing my testimony, preparing for the defense's inevitable attacks on my credibility and motivations. Daniel's lawyers would try to paint me as a vindictive ex-fiancée seeking revenge, rather than a victim who'd escaped with evidence of his crimes. "Remember," the prosecutor advised, "stick to facts. Don't let them bait you into emotional responses. Your recording speaks for itself." That recording had become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Daniel's own words, confessing to fraud and threatening violence, presented in his smooth, educated voice. As I left the courthouse, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. Naive enough to believe that wealth and charm indicated good character. Trusting enough to ignore red flags that should have been obvious. That woman would have made excuses for Daniel's behavior, rationalized his coldness toward his family, accepted his explanations without question. The woman I'd become was harder, more skeptical, but also stronger. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to value substance over surface charm, to recognize manipulation tactics that had once slipped past my defenses. The experience had been traumatic, but it had also been educational in ways I couldn't have imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from my new therapist, confirming our appointment for tomorrow. Healing from psychological trauma was a process, she'd explained, not a destination. Some days were better than others. But overall, I was learning to process what had happened without letting it define my future. There would be other relationships eventually, other opportunities for love and trust. But they would be built on a foundation of self-respect and awareness that Daniel's manipulation had inadvertently taught me to value. In a twisted way, his betrayal had become a gift, showing me exactly what genuine love wasn't supposed to look like. The trial would be difficult, but I was ready for it. Ready to face Daniel in court, to tell my story publicly, to help ensure he never hurt anyone else the way he'd hurt his parents and his other victims. Ready to close this chapter of my life and move forward with hard-won wisdom about the difference between charm and character. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of survival and justice. Sometimes the most painful betrayals lead us exactly where we need to be, even when we can't see it at the time. Trust your instincts, value your safety over politeness, and remember that the right person will never make you question your worth or fear for your well-being. Have you ever discovered something shocking about someone you trusted? Share your experiences in the comments below, and remember that speaking up about manipulation and abuse can save lives, including your own, because sometimes the best wedding gift is not getting married at all.